So we are going to just go over what our goals are for today. Now this is the first time we are doing the Socratic like this as a class together. So for today, we'll have the inner circle, the outer circle, our helpers, but know in the next time we do a Socratic, you all will take on the speaker role, you all will take on the coaching role, okay, you all will take on the observation role. So if you could crank your neck this way. This is a lot to do, this has a lot to do with our common core, right, because that's good thinking. So for our goal for reading is I can integrate, well, someone else popcorn out please and read our first goal.
I can integrate and available multiple text and whatever. Shut up.
Hey, you're not a coach, you're just a coach. I'm teasing.
Question or solve a problem.
Okay, right? Because we want to make sure we refer back to our text to prove our point. We want to make sure we always refer to the text to prove our point. Speaking, can someone popcorn out our speaking goal?
I can support ideas with text. I can integrate multiple texts to make informed decisions and self-help.
Okay, so we have two texts, actually three, because our textbook talks about ethics, right? So however you want to use those. And then people on the outer circle and other people listening, can I have one of those people please popcorn out the third goal of today?
I can evaluate the credibility and accuracy of each source and note any discrepancy among the data.
Discrepancy among the data. Thank you very much. Kat, are there questions on any one of those goals? All right, so we're going to go ahead then, and we'll have Azalea and Kat up at the board. They're just going to be noting some things. We have some other people noting some things, so please don't let that distract you. We're going to start off with a 15-minute discussion, and then we're going to have our half time. We'll start off with a 15-minute discussion. I got to get my timer set. Oh boy. Yes, questions, please.
So, as the coaches, should we fill this out in hash time?
Okay, excellent question. Excellent question. You can fill that out for halftime and then see if they improve for the second quarter, and I'll tell you how to, yeah. You can even mark next to your notation. I'm sorry. I know it's not a question for everyone. You can even mark next to your notation, like first and then second. And again, I'm going to step back. This is for you to discuss the ideas. Thank you for calling, Mr. Berry. This is for you to discuss the ideas. Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Now you're on pen. Now. Sorry? I don't know why I didn't do that. Okay, ready? All right, here we go. 15 minutes. I'm going to step back. This is all for you to discuss. Does Diana Baumrein make valid arguments about Stanley Milgram's experiment?
No.
Can you unpack that for me?
I feel that it does make some good points, but then later in Milgram's argument against that, he completely resolves any problems that she had with the experiment.
I feel like she was mostly opinionated instead of like showing hardcore facts, like how she was saying like the whole like building relationships and stuff like that. Those more opinionated things.
So she stated that his casual assurance that tension after experiment was dissipated is unconvincing, and Milgram made it clear that he made sure the subjects were fine afterwards.
I agree with what Worthy said about how she did have some valid points, but I do personally think that Milgram's experiment was justified and was also ethical.
of the participants were glad to some degree that they participated in the study, while only 1.3 said they were not happy, and with only 15% neutral. And that was out of a 92% return reduction, which is pretty solid evidence.
And then, sorry. Going off of that, one of one of her major points was that the subjects felt emotional discomfort and stress, and that went against the guidelines set by the American Psychological Association. But then later, he comes back to it and he addresses that point, and he says that they were given the option to stop at any point of time, and that they chose to keep giving the patient electrical shocks, and that their own stress was caused by themselves, because they didn't have to do that. No one was forcing them to electrocute the man. Nobody was holding a gun to their head and making them do it. It was their choice to keep administrating the electrical shock, and then therefore that their stress was self-justified, and that they brought it onto themselves.
Yeah, she said that like the subjects were like under like stress, but like he states that he did not expect that. Like that's the point of the experiment, was to see how people would react.
Yeah, following up with that, he said in his conclusion in the response that the results could not be foreseen before the experiment was coming out, so he didn't expect that people would be like that. And then again, there were procedures that were in place to make sure that the stress dissipated quickly and not injury.
Like, to be honest, I feel like, or whatever, I feel like she was purposely trying to find flaws, or purposely trying to pick out, so that she could argue against, because in Milgram's article, he did cover everything that she was like, but then, the lab was not the right place to do it, and that's caused discomfort and etc. But I think she was probably purposely trying to pick out something so that she can argue with.
Yeah. Going with what Celeste said, when people hear about the design of the experiment, their mindset is people won't do it. But once it's actually done, they have more the attitude that if they do, they won't be able to live with themselves afterwards. It's kind of fun that they said this wasn't good.
I see what you guys are saying, because like you said, if the results would have been different, it would have been that people wouldn't have had sympathy, they wouldn't have been so much conflict with it.
And then going off of what Leslie and Canella said, going mostly off of Canella, there was a quote and it said, people will not do it when the results are made known. This attitude is expressed as if they do it, they will not be able to live with themselves afterwards. But then he goes on to elaborate and says that if they do flip the switch, if they do it, then whatever justified their behavior to flip the switch will also justify them to be able to live with their decision. It's the same thing that goes both. So if they do flip the switch, then they also have it in them to live with their decision.
So she makes really good points, but then she kind of loses her credibility because she puts opinionated sentences after it. When she talks about all the stress and stuff, but then she says that usually an attitude of compassion, self-gratitude, and common sense will suffice. That is really sassy and kind of lost her credibility a little bit.
Milgram in his article states here, I'll read a quote, is not Baumrine's criticism based as much on the unanticipated findings as on the method. The findings were that some subjects performed in what appeared to be a shockingly immoral way. If, instead, every one of the subjects had broken off at slight shock, or at the first sign of the learner's discomfort, the results would have been pleasant and reassuring, and who would protest?
I don't know if you mentioned before, but did Baumrine know that there wasn't someone on the other side, like that is an actor on the.
Yeah.
Okay.
She read the report that was given by Milgram afterwards of how his experiment was carried out.
One thing about that report though that Milgram said was that you couldn't judge the experiment based on just that report. That you needed to have the other stuff, so that was
Right, because there
that was
was,
easily accessible.
it was in his references that there was other things, and he made that a point in his response.
I think one of the big points that Berman made was that it wasn't a valid experiment because, as Lo said, it took place in the laboratory and that was the wrong setting. That it wasn't valid because they walked into it expecting to be obedient to the scientists in charge. But that's exactly what he was testing. Like, he wanted them to be in a place where they're not in charge. He wanted them to be in a position where they felt they needed to be obedient and see if they still made the morally wrong decisions. And so I think that his experiment was actually set up perfectly for his goals of what he was trying to accomplish.
And like going off what Hannah said, like Baumright argued that like it was unethical and how would you do that to the subjects and stuff. But Milgram, he was obviously got that idea from the Holocaust, from why would you do stuff to innocent people? So as a scientist, I'm pretty sure he was like smart enough to realize it's not actually gonna hurt people or not, his intention wasn't to make someone nervous or fidgety or whatever. So I think like her argument with that is invalid because he obviously had it laid out and in his report, and he had it, the way he wanted without like doing any damage.
The real question is, what are the forces underlying ultimate action? Which doesn't really matter what the seven is following that figure of authority. I agree with all of you, because every person that went into the lab had choices to reject or accept the authority. So like, yeah, they came in, but they had a choice to be a force.
Like for example, when we saw a video, there was actually one guy, two that actually were like doing with him or this guy's campaign or whatever.
And it kind of just going off of everything from the side with the ethics side of it, the guidelines specifically that are set, like there's 4 of them. The first one is to obtain informed consent, which he did. Like he didn't force anybody to do the experiment. They all had a choice, they all consented to it, they all chose to be in it. Then the second one is to protect them from physical or emotional harm and discomfort, which although they did feel emotional discomfort and stress, that was by their own decisions. He didn't set up the experiment to cause that. And in his article, he does say that there are many laboratory procedures specifically designed to create stress, but the obedience was not one of them. So his experiment was not set up specifically to cause stress, that the subjects, his actions and decisions made themselves feel stressed. Then the third one is to keep information about the individual participants confidential, which he did. He didn't go around embarrassing them or releasing stuff that they were uncomfortable with the public knowing. And then the fourth one is to fully debrief people, which he made very clear that he had extensive discussions with each of the participants. He addressed all of their individual concerns afterwards, and that they all left emotionally stable and in an okay state of mind. So I do think that he followed all the guidelines set up, making it an ethical lab.
I agree, going off. Oh yeah, I want to stress that he didn't know that they were going to react this way. Like, he had no idea. He was so like the psychologist, the ethical standards of psychologists. They don't want the subjects to be like stressed or feel that way, but he had no idea they would. So.
And again with the stress point of it, again they followed up a year later. It says listening to Milgram's article. He had them all examined by a physician, and he said none was found by the interviewer to show signs of him being harmed by this experiment. Each subject seemed to handle this task in the experiment in a manner consistent with well-established patterns of behavior, no evidence of cognitive interactions. And then again, when he mentions this early in his article, when he first designed this experiment, he ran it by a couple colleagues and a couple other psychologists that all found no problems with it, and you would assume since they're all somewhat, I guess, certified psychologists that they'd be aware, or they'd be familiar with the guidelines set by the American Psychological Association. So you'd assume that someone would say, hey, this is wrong, you should probably consider this so that you don't get repercussions later.
Kind of going off what you said, like, she found so many problems with the experiment, like the psychological impacts and stuff like that. You wanted to include, like, undermining, like, your trust in authority. But, like, in the article it says, I see it as a potentially valuable experience insofar as to make people aware of the problem of the discriminate position to authority. So even if those problems were there to learn, it's still key to learn something from it.
Yeah, going off of what Camilla said is that the experiment is just not any authority. He is an authority who tells the subject to act harshly and inhumanely against another man, and that's a different kind of authority.
And then going off of what Anna said, one of Berman's major criticisms, and I'm going to read it as he states it in his article, it's not Berman's criticism based as much on the unanticipated findings as on the method. The findings were that some subjects performed in what appeared to be shockingly immoral ways. If instead every one of the subjects had broke off at light shock or at the first signs of the learner's discomfort, would the results have been pleasant, reassuring, and he would have protested. So I think that's a really strong point that he makes, that if the results had come out different, if the people hadn't shocked the learner that many times, if they had decided to go against and be disobedient, nobody would have objected to this case. Like, they would have never felt stress, they would have never felt emotional discomfort, this wouldn't have been a controversial study. But because of the way that the subject acted and nobody had any clue how they were going to respond, that this became this big controversial thing. But none of the experimenters, none of the scientists in charge had any control of the reactions, and they had no clue, as Anna was saying earlier, they couldn't control their responses.
Kind of going on that, like, with these experiments, it doesn't matter, like, even if you think it's very unethical, like, in the Milgram article, it states that understanding those because you examine a situation in which the end is unknown. So obviously, you don't know what was going to happen, but you learn so much from it, and you might not do it again, which is something nice to have.
He did actually shock the people. He actually shocked me by the guy.
And then going back off of what Camilla said, it says in one of them, where I highlighted it, that
Finish your point, Kim?
that even though, like, there may have been emotional discomfort momentarily, the results of his experiment will last indefinitely. So yes, there might have been minutes of discomfort, but his findings will last forever. And like, that research is never going to go away, and it's always going to be able to influence other experiments, and it's always going to be able to be there, even after the stress leaves.
Great, that brings us to halftime. So what I would like to have happen now, we have our comment counter Claire. Boy, that's a lot of C. Comment counter Claire. C, Q. So coaches, you can look at that. So you're going to talk to your coaches right now, people in the inner circle. Maybe your tip is, we need to hear your voice. Maybe your tip is, let's try to use some more in-depth transitions, or let's try to use some transitions. So please meet with your coach right now, and then we're going to hear from our other people. Thank you. Take a few minutes.
No, but I know. I think it's like just like
It's like, okay, and that one's done, the next one's right.
Yeah,
I think that's fantastic.
I have a question. What was the original question?
The original question was how I justified criticism. In other words, was give examples for can I just get a check? Did everyone get a chance to speak to their coach? All right. Coaches, so if everyone can please, let's turn in, what did you notice, comment counter? Claire? Okay, Anna had spoken up the most. Any other observations from your data?
Just based on the prominent people who usually speak in class, it seemed to be the people that speak in circle.
Yes, but I was happy to hear some new voices today that we don't know where we hear from. Yes, that's a good observation. Okay, Kat, why don't you talk about some of the quotes? Oh, I'm sorry, Karen, why don't you talk about some?
All right, quotes. It seems like our class is kind of half and half right now with where they stand, and a lot of stress talk is going on. Like some people think it's, I don't know how to explain it.
You mean the idea that the participants were stressed came up?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Do you feel that it's half and half, like half of the people in the circle are quoting from the page, or do you think a lot of people are doing that?
I think both, yeah.
Yeah, that they're doing a good job
Yeah.
of quoting from the text? All right, let's check in with Marissa. Marissa, your role, please.
A lot of people are saying, do you just want me to talk about like?
You're the transition tracker?
Yeah.
Yeah, so please, what did you notice?
A lot of people are saying going off of, which I think is really cool because they're like going off of someone else's idea. But they're not really using like a lot of variety with transitions. It's just usually just that one. Or I think and I feel. Those are like the three ones that they use the most.
Okay, thank you. So things to think about for all of us. Azalea and Kat, what are some big ideas that came up?
Well, like right when we started, the first thing was like Milgram's experiment was ethical, and that I don't know,
Baumrein.
Was most of her stuff was opinionated, and like the biggest thing is like all the points that Baumrein pointed out was like diminished from Milgram's explanation. So if someone would say that, then we're like, well, in his, so you call it da 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 da. So like they counteracted very well. And then the other facts, like everybody agreed that they were left emotionally stable. And Hannah's like last point was that if the results were different, it wouldn't be such a controversy.
Thank you for catching all of that. That's great. And I'm just curious, is anyone in the inner circle, because there's some voices we didn't hear, but I'm just curious. So is everyone in the inner circle feeling that Milgram was justified in his experiment?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's fine. So we're going to set the next set of questions for 10 minutes. So coaches, you'll be observing and marking as well. Let's hear, I have Autumn and I have Andrew just making general observations of the class in general. What did I actually, I'm getting everyone's name. It's the A's and the C's that are confusing me today. All right, sorry. Ashley. Carrie. Kate. Just observations that you made.
A lot. Great points and everything, but I think other people need to speak
speak up a little bit more.
Andrew?
She basically
She's basically covered it. All right. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you 2 questions, so whichever one do you want to take first. One kind of along the lines, should this experiment be replicated? If so, why? And why do some people, this is a controversial experiment, that's why we still study it. Why do some people fear psychological experiments? Why do you think some people fear so this is going off of what we learned from Milgram, but also our own interpretation of things from what we've learned so far in psychology. Do you need me to repeat the 2 questions? Should this experiment be replicated? And why do some people fear psychology and psychological studies?
Can we pick one?
Yep. Start us off. Someone start us off.